Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this wonderful event from our Undergraduate Research Week. This is the special student panel on innovation and community, and it is one of our events that is kicking off Undergraduate Research Week, which is a full week of events and presentations run by the Undergraduate Research Center. So welcome everybody. Today we're going to be hearing from four undergraduate students at UCLA who are doing work related to innovation and community, which is the theme of the panel. My name is Jacquelyn Ardam. I am one of the assistant directors of the Undergraduate Research Center for the Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. And today we are featuring the work of four students. So the way that things are going to do today is first I'm going to introduce our student panelists, tell you a little bit about them. Then they will each do a brief, and I mean a very brief presentation of their research. And then I've got a different set of questions that I'm going to ask all of the students. And then at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A for about 10-15 minutes. So you, the audience members, will be able to ask your questions. So you can feel free to put your questions in the chat or, unmute yourselves when that's ready. When we're ready for that. So first I'm going to introduce all of our panelists at once, and then they will take turns sharing their work with you. So our first presenter today is sorry, I combined your first two names, Dominica Chua, and Hannah is a world arts and culture major and a Filipino studies minor. The title of their research project is Joy Served Daily, the Jollibee Empire, Labor Exploitation, and Selling Diasporic Nostalgia. Our second presenter today is going to be Jason Hu. Jason is a major in mathematics and is doing research in microbiology, immunology, and molecular genetics. And the title of his research project, and hopefully I'm going to say most of this correctly, Filamentous Architecture of the Native in Situ 3-methocrontyl CoA Carboxylase Holoenzyme. He needed to help me with that before. So that's our second presenter, Jason. Our third presenter is Madina Safdari, and Medina is a psychology major. And the name of her research project is Analysis of Transfer Student Experiences. And then last but not least, we have Janet Zamudio, and Janet's major is Public Affairs and Geography. And Janet will be sharing a research project called A Tale of Two Movements, Coalition Building Between Environmental Justice and Affordable Housing in Southeast Los Angeles. I'm going to start off by turning things over to Hannah. So Hannah, please go ahead, unmute yourself and share your research with us.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah. I use she, they pronouns. I'm really excited to be part of this panel and very happy to share space with all of y'all. So I'll keep it very brief. My project explores the restaurant franchise Jollibee. If y'all don't know, it's a very popular Filipino fast food chain. They have stores all around the world globally. And essentially what this project is for me is that it's a creative exploration into what Jollibee means for Filipinxs in the diaspora, but also in the Philippines, how like Jollibee is a cultural icon that just becomes like something that's synonymous with Filipino identity abroad in the United States when Filipinos don't have much access to Filipinx culture in their everyday public lives. So then they see Jollibee, this like huge bee mascot thing, and they're like, oh wait, that's like a point of identification for Filipinos to identify themselves in a mainstream in public. So my project explores that, but then also adding a critical consideration of labor into it, where what does it mean that so much of this corporation, this massive Jollibee corporation, what does it mean that they employ and exploit Filipinx laborers that make this cultural experience happen? So it's like, how can we assign so much of our identity into this, like their corporate practices? So it's a lot of different components. There's also the art making factor of it, where it's like, okay, yes, we have this, we have these memories and these nostalgic and romantic sentiments attached to this restaurant, but then we contend with these like the labor issues and the more corporate side of it. But how can we remake and make culture to be something that not only represents like our actual lived experiences, but also what we want to govern the future? So I'm going to share the screen just to share a little bit about like visuals of my project. So this is the homepage right now. And so yeah, so this project is a lot of different components to it. It's a project that was definitely built by and around community. This was like knowledge that was created in the moment, you know, collectively together. But I think one of us that I just wanted to focus was the art activation component. So in the winter, I actually held I co-facilitated an art making workshop with a Filipinx artist to interpret the topics that we explored. And then I engaged some folks from the Filipinx diaspora, and we got to share stories with each other. We got to share experiences of what Filipinx identity means to us, while also getting to learn new practical art making skills. Yeah, so this is some of the art that was made during the workshop. And then same thing here. And all of this has like an interactive component to it, just to make sure that it's accessible, because oftentimes we notice that when we ask people to make art, you know, it's really intimidating to just hand up a blank piece of paper. So this way we wanted to guide folks through the discussion through an art making activity, so that they have a practical and I guess more productive way of channeling their emotions into something that's actionable, so they can repurpose these skills for other projects as well. And yeah, so these are just some highlights, definitely a lot more. Please check out the website. Maybe I could drop the link later somewhere in the chat. Cool.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing. If you could put a link in the chat, that would be fantastic. And then folks can check out your work on their own time. Okay, great. So next we are going to be hearing from Jason. So Jason, you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about your research project?
Hi everyone, my name is Jason. I'm a math major and I got into structural biology research actually due to coincidence. I was introduced to the topic by my friend Jerry, and I soon became fascinated by the complexity and nuance of the subject. So I'd like to share my screen, show you a little bit about my research. So what you see here is in the middle is the enzyme that I study. Oh, are you guys still seeing my screen? Okay, great. Yeah, so I study the filamentous architecture of 3-methyl-CoA carboxylase. This enzyme is responsible for the catabolism of leucine, which is an essential amino acid in our bodies. So the reason why we use cryo-EM to study the architecture of these enzymes is to infer novel conclusions about its function. So by looking at what it looks like, we can find out what novel mechanisms it has. So one fun fact about this enzyme is that previously in the 1970s, researchers thought that this particular protein had a tetrameric structure, but based on our cryo-EM studies, we actually showed that it has a dodecameric structure. So a lot of what they wrote in the textbook back then were actually incorrect. So the reason why this research is significant is because many people in the world suffer from 3-methyl-CoA deficiency. It's a genetic disorder, often in infants, and currently there's no treatment for this. The enzyme that I study is from a parasite called Leishmania tarentuli, and this parasite is classified as a neglected tropical disease by the WHO, and it's endemic in, I think, East Africa, and affects around 1 million people per year. So yeah, this is my research, and thank you guys for coming to listen.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing, Jason. Up next, we have Medina.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Medina, and I will also be sharing my screen. One second. See all my tabs open to get here. Okay. Okay, I believe you guys can see it now. But like Dr. Ardam said, my research project is an analysis of UCLA transfer student experiences. And so I myself am a transfer, and I will definitely say that it wasn't my first instinct to study transfer students, but I'm happy that this is where my research came to be. It definitely took a lot of conversations with my faculty mentor, Dr. Markowitz, to eventually land on this research topic. So What I ended up doing is a study that explores transfer stigma, transfer shock, academic and social adjustment. And I did that using a large survey of current UCLA transfer students. So the research questions I asked were, how do transfer students' interactions with UCLA faculty differ from their interactions with community college faculty? Then I asked, to what extent do transfer students experience difficulty adjusting academically and socially to UCLA? And to what extent do they perceive transfer stigma? And then finally, I asked if all of these things in research, and the second research question, vary by first-gen status, family income, gender, and race. And so to elaborate a little bit more on my research methods, I did a survey. It came from the Land and Transfer Student Questionnaire, which is like 100+ item survey, but we shortened it to 62 items just to capture those key constructs that I mentioned. And then these questions were, they were statements, and the participants would answer them on a 4-point Likert scale, ranging from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And so an example of one of the questions would be a statement that read, "My level of stress has increased since I've come to UCLA," and then we would measure, they could select their response. And then for the purposes of reporting our data, we just kind of combined the strongly agree and strongly disagree, and then made it dichotomous with the strongly disagree and disagree variable responses. So that gave us a really good understanding of how the data went, if people were feeling pretty positively about their experiences or pretty negatively. And then to get as many participants as we could, we did raffles for $20, $50 Amazon gift cards, which landed us with a sample size, or response size of 350 students. And then to go into the results, very broad results I am sharing, but definitely gets the gist of it. On average, in our sample, respondents had better faculty interactions and perceptions at community college in comparison to UCLA. Just in general, transfer students went to their community college professors' office hours more. They talked about their career ambitions more, and they just felt a little bit more comfortable with their community college professors than they do with their UCLA professors. Another thing we saw in the data was transfers in general struggled to academically adjust to UCLA, and they experienced a dip in their GPA upon transferring. Socially, there was an overwhelming number of respondents who experienced increased stress. So that same statement I just said, I think that was, if not our highest, or one of our highest agree statements. So that was sad to see. And then finally, about half of our respondents felt stigmatized by other UCLA students for being a transfer student. So what does this mean? I know it's very broad at the moment, but what we can see from the data is that continuing to invest in transfer awareness training with an emphasis on getting that training to UCLA professors is key. We just need to make sure that the UCLA professors know that, hey, like, reach out to your transfer students and make sure that they know you're there for them, and make your office hours pretty flexible. And then also making sure there's additional academic support and development for transfer students to make sure that the transition to UCLA is just a little bit easier academically. And then on the social aspect, creating more opportunities for social events and community bonding would go a long way in helping out transfer students. So that's my research in a nutshell. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Medina. You put a lot of information in there very quickly. So that was fantastic. Okay, last but not least, we have Janet.
Can everyone see my screen? Cool. Hi, everyone. So my name is Zamudio. I'm a current third year, double majoring public affairs and geography. And my research topic is a tale of two movements, coalition building between environmental justice and affordable housing in Southeast LA. So two major questions I had for my research project were actually, so what does coalition building between the environmental justice movement and affordable housing movement look like in Southeast Los Angeles. So is it good? Is it bad? Like, what are some complications from that? And then as well as what implications does this have on like the inaccessible legal protections that come from environmental injustice as well as housing insecurity? And so I might refer to Southeast LA as SELA, which is like a nickname a lot of SELA residents use. And so first of all, why am I interested in this? Why is my topic research topic so long? So I'm actually born and raised from Southeast Los Angeles. I moved around, went to high school in this region, and then moved around a lot due to like housing insecurity for me and my family. And then I'm also been directly impacted by environmental injustices. So a big impact that a lot of Southeast LA residents feel are having to have asthma inhalers. And it's a disproportionate impact to a lot of children in this region, as well as throughout Los Angeles. And so that's a lot of why I'm doing it, as well as like previous advocacy work I've done in environmental justice. And so in this research, I was able to work on 3 different like components. One was like the direct like analysis of like literature, and then also looking at like comparisons with this like geographic mapping system called CalEnviro 3.0. And so that one like measures how badly or how good the environmental health of this region is. And it coincides a lot with like polluters as well as other like toxic sites within a region. And I was also able to conduct 45 to 60-minute interviews with Southeast LA grassroots organizers, just to understand the ground knowledge that's happening within these movements, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so some results I had were, there was like a continued environmental health burden. So most of Southeast LA they have like an environmental health burden of 95 to 100%, which is really poor. The higher the number, the worse the environmental pollution is in that region. And so a majority of it is very highly impacted by these things. And the COVID-19 pandemic only exacerbated these issues with environmental injustice. And so people who are already predisposed to asthma, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, and other negative health impacts are continuing to have high risk of these, as well as higher risks to hospitalization and death due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we see this intersection between the health as well as the environmental component intersect with where people live, where people pay rent, where people have to work. And so a lot of that had to do with my results and seeing that, but also seeing community resistance and community resilience through that. And so a big component to that was seeing a lot of know your rights initiatives, a lot of tenant legal clinics, as you can see in like the presentation, as well as just mutual aid funds, the more bare bone necessities that people needed to pay rent, to be able to like have enough money to go to the hospital, right? A lot of people in this region are also undocumented, are also don't have health insurance, despite like what like the Affordable Care Act, right? And so that was a big impact. And so like there's a lot of implications to that, and major ones is seeing the highlighting and emphasis on the relationship between environmental injustice and housing insecurity, as well as other injustices within the region. And then you also see that it's not the main focus to solely focus on policy, right? You have to make sure that you're understanding that these people are people and they're humans, and they have like so many different facets of their life, and being able to implement that in either policy, law, and actual resources being allocated. And then seeing how grassroots organizing has also brought community building. It really represents community voices versus seeing what we see like in government officials. We see government officials as a person of a district instead of the people in that district. And yeah, that's my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Janet. Congratulations to you all. You're all doing such different, such exciting work across UCLA. And it's great to hear so many of you together. Okay, so I'm going to actually start off. I've got a set of questions that I'm going to ask all of you. And maybe since we started with Hannah, we will start this time with Janet and work backwards. So my first question is kind of a broad question for all of you. And, you know, this is a panel on innovation and community. So what I wanted to hear about is how community relates to your research. So this is really a broad question. So some things you might want to think about are, you know, what communities are you a part of? What communities have you done research with? And then also what communities are you studying? And, you know, what is the connection that you see between these communities? So it's a really broad question to get you to think about community in your work. So Janet, do you want to go first for us?
Yeah, so community is the reason why I started this project. As I mentioned before, I did do a lot of work in environmental justice advocacy with Communities for a Better Environment. And so they were a big component to this research project, as well as just like common conversations I would have at like the office. I ended up being able to highlight in this presentation. And so I think it's a big component to my research and why I'm driven to do this research. I'm also part of the UCLA community, and I know my experiences and others at UCLA, academia is not accessible. And seeing that and being able to create a connection between academia and this inaccessibility and kind of sometimes not elitism, but just being unable to access these languages as well as papers and research to like everyday people is something I want to do with my research. And so that was a big component to why I decided to do this research project. And yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Medina, do you want to talk a little bit about what community means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. My entire research project would not be possible without the kindness of the transfer community and everyone who like gave their time to take my survey. So that first and foremost is what comes to mind when I think of community in terms of my research project. But also to add on to that, the transfer community and transfers in general are a more diverse group of students than freshmen admits. They are more likely to be first generation students, more likely to come from low income backgrounds. They're more racially diverse. And so one of my research questions was to look at variability by all of these different demographic groups. And it's really telling in the data to see some of my assumptions in terms of what groups might be struggling the most, to also see that, you know, to see those patterns in the data. But it also, there are times in my data where I've been surprised to see that the everyday assumptions I have about, you know, who's being affected by the UCLA educational environment, those have been turned on its head as well. I'm doing my research, so it's been really eye-opening. And yeah, the community is the core of my research, and it's been really nice to be able to study it and also be a part of the transfer community. And there were times where I when I was distributing my survey and trying to get respondents, I posted flyers in the transfer dorm and around campus where I could. And then sometimes people would, like, when I would introduce myself, to be like, "Oh, you're the girl doing the transfer, you know, survey." They're like, "I took your survey, and like, you know, I hope I win the raffle." And it would just warm my heart because yeah, it goes so much more than just what I'm doing behind my computer.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's wonderful. I like that you have made a name for yourself on campus with your flyers. Okay, great. Jason, do you want to tell us a little bit about community in your work?
Yeah, so I want to talk about community in two perspectives. So the first perspective I want to talk about is with respect to the scientific community. From my lab, I've experienced so much help from postdocs, PhDs, and my PI in helping me do my research and giving me advice on the steps I should take and how should I present my results to the other people in the scientific community. For example, I've learned how to use the microscopes, how to interpret data, how to use the correct software. Everything has been with the help of the people in my lab. Also, I think with respect to the scientific community, there is a great body of work that concerns the legacy of the subject. So the reason I've been able to generate so many of my conclusions about methyl-quantocoated carboxylase is because there's biochemical data from the 1970s, which people studied. And from that, I'm able to look at the historical hypotheses and observations, and from that, generate novel conclusions about my own research. So the second thing I want to talk about is that real people in this world are affected by the things I study. So for example, for methyl-quantocoated deficiency, I think I mentioned this before, there's like 1 out of 30K newborns are affected by this inherited disease worldwide. And for the parasite I study, Leishmania tarentuli, about 1 million people per year are affected. And so I think by studying this, we can hopefully in the future find treatment or prevention, which will help people in the next generation.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Jason. Hannah, do you want to tell us a little bit about community and your work?
Yeah, I mean, they've already said a lot of the things that I was going to say, so I'm going to be echoing a little bit. But yeah, it's going to sound cliche, but I really am not exaggerating when I say that community is the heart and machine of this work, of my work. This project would not exist without the community, especially since so much of the data relies on lived experience. And so that really comes from relationships with people, that comes from being parts of different communities, from knowing different people within the communities. And so, yeah, like, again, like this knowledge wouldn't be created without the people in the community. And every single aspect of this project was helped by community, was collectively created. It was, I would ask my friends, hey, do you know if there's an artist that's interested in doing this, that has like these similar values? Do you know someone who can design this? Are you able to come over to help me pack this? Like I was packing like 30 workshop boxes for art kits, and it was me and my roommates on the floor of our living room. So my friends came over and we just helped pack those boxes. And I'm really thankful to have access to a community that is so generous, but also just so full of their own individual knowledge, because I believe that each person does carry an incredible body of knowledge, and I'm very fortunate enough to be part of the community where I can tap into that. And so, yeah, this project is really created by and for community. I'm part of the Filipinx community. I'm a 1.5 gen immigrant. I immigrated from the Philippines when I was 8. And so like the reasons why I got interested in this topic and exploring Filipinx identity and culture, especially in the diaspora, is because, you know, these are my personal experiences. Like I am a subject in my own project, but in a way it's made it much more personal, much more fulfilling. And I've been able to apply my personal experiences as data as well. But yeah, so I'm very active in the Filipinx and Asian American community at UCLA. I also organize a lot with Filipinx transfers. So I was really excited by your study, Medina. Yeah, so I really just like try to tap into all the people that I know in different spaces and then work with them, of course, as collaborators, and yeah, make knowledge together. I truly believe that everyone, like you could just, knowledge is created. It's not owned or sold or anything like that. So for me, the community aspect is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. It's great to hear all of the different relationships you all have to community in your projects. Okay, now I'm going to move to the next question, which is the other part of our title, which is innovation. So I would love to hear from all of you about how your project is innovative, or what innovation means to you, and kind of what innovations do you hope might come out of your project. So let's see, why don't we go in a different order? So Medina, do you want to start off for us?
Yeah, I'd love to. Innovation, yeah. I guess how can I make this in a nice, pretty package? I think with my research specifically regarding such a, I guess, clearly defined group on campus, you know, transfer students, it's very clear who transfer students are. And going into my research, I knew that there were a lot of issues in terms of just welcoming transfer students and helping them get oriented. And the list goes on in terms of ways we can improve our treatment and reception of transfer students. And so for me, innovation in that regard means to bring the data and bring the research and bring the evidence to be able to back up, you know, the change that you would like to see. So That sounds very broad, but for me, my implications section that I shared with you guys was the innovation. It was pushing the envelope forward just a little bit to be able to show, hey, 350 students took this survey and they felt stressed and their GPA dropped when they came here and they have a hard time making friends. All of those things I think are valuable, and to be able, the innovative part of it is to be able to take those things and create something tangible out of them to make the next year of transfer admits feel just a little bit more welcome, a little bit more accepted. I know, I guess, like on surface value, innovation might feel like this huge thing of like, I am creating this like incredible thing that is like going to cure cancer. But in a smaller regard, innovation also just means doing better than you did before. And that's the way I see it. That's the hope I have for my research, is shining a light on something that isn't always so obvious, but it's there and it exists. And then to be able to use the things that we found and researched and measured and be able to do better tomorrow than we did yesterday. So that's innovation for me.
Thank you so much. Okay, Jason, do you want to share what innovation means to you in your work?
Yeah, I would say innovation is quite central to science, because we're always trying to find something novel about our lives. So in my research, I looked at the filamentation of carboxylases. So this has actually been quite a hot topic in recent years where researchers have looked at how enzymes form filaments. Previously, they weren't able to do this because the traditional method of looking at proteins was using X-ray crystallography, where they put these proteins and they form crystals. And when you form crystals, you can't form filaments. But with this new method of cryo-EM, we're able to observe these proteins in their native in situ environment. So this has been something new that researchers have been looking into. So another thing that is specific to my research is that the way we're able to pick the subparticles from the 2D micrograph was quite novel to us, because I had to code up a program which was able to splice the filaments into its distinct subunits, and then take the subunits to average it into a 2D average, and then create a 3D map, composite map from it. This is non-trivial for our field, and I believe I did something novel for that.
That's very exciting. Thank you for sharing. Okay, finally, we have Hannah.
Yeah, for innovation, for me, really, it was about kind of moving away from a scarcity mindset that we've been so used to living under capitalism, you know, this like idea that we need to compete and keep to accumulate more things. And I wanted to push away from that and really push more into the realm of abundance, and realizing that everything that we need is already here. It's just a matter of redistributing those resources and also trying to challenge and destabilize those power structures that make those resources inaccessible. So for me, again, like a huge part of this project was accessibility, and really pushing people, really taking away all the barriers that people might have to participating in this project or to wanting to converse in dialogue or come together and like share stories, right? So again, that's like, for me, that was providing all the workshop materials. So very gracious for URSP to receive funding for this project, because I was able to provide 30 people sets of free materials all across the state, and some were even out of state. And then I sent out an intake survey in the beginning, like, hey, this is what we're going to be doing in the workshop. If you don't have any of these things, or if you don't anticipate being able to do any of these things, please let us know. We'll try as best as we can to accommodate. So yeah, so just being as accessible as possible to make sure that people enjoy the experience rather than have it be something that's stressful. Fun and play is definitely a lot of things that I wanted to focus on in this project, and having it be people-centered. So that also means on the collaborators, and like, for example, I worked with an artist collaborator. It was really, really, really important for me that they wouldn't just be, I wouldn't just tell them to be like, oh, hey, make a design. And then like, we do that, right? Like, no, I wanted to create a genuine relationship with them. And we did. Like, we became really good friends. We have the same pair of shoes now. But it was great because they came into the project knowing very little about the topic too, and so they brought in their own personal perspectives as Filipinx American, as a Filipinx American, and they were able to contribute and add on to the project in ways that I didn't even think about. So we got to learn together, and we got to produce content together. And part of that also is like making sure that your collaborator is properly compensated and properly credited. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to focus on in my project is like innovation in terms of accessibility, in terms of abundance, and really emphasizing the collective nature of knowledge creation. Like this is definitely not all me by any means.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Hannah. And now Janet, sorry, I misspoke earlier. We didn't hear from Janet yet.
Yeah, so I mean, I know everyone on the panel just mentioned how innovation is just making something new and creating either a new method, research, or just a new approach to something. And so I wanted for environmental justice, there is a lot of work out there being done, a lot of community oriented research, but not a lot of things talking about intersecting environmental justice and affordable housing specifically. There's a lot of like conversation around like green gentrification and how making something a greener space ends up pushing people out of the space. And so I did want to talk a lot about that, but as well as how these two movements are coming together at the result of the COVID-19 pandemic, but not that it's never been there, but these conversations have been happening. So I wanted to take a new approach to like research itself and making sure that this is being highlighted. And so that's kind of why what innovation means to my project. And
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so I think we've got time for like one more question from me, and then we'll open things up to the audience. So I'd love to know, what was the most valuable lesson that you learned doing research this year, or could be multiple lessons, but what's one thing that you are really taking away from your research experience? And it could, be related to the content of your project, or, more related to sort of like personal growth type stuff. So let's see, why don't we start with Janet this time?
yeah, so in terms of seeing how like my research and how this is just going, I don't know. I'm gonna be honest. I saw my research as like something I wanted to work forward to, but I'm kind of in a state of I don't know, because there's so many different routes I can take. I can continue to expand on how environmental justice, affordable housing, as well as economic justice, which is a kind of a new concept to brought forth, but it's always been there, like people wanting to move up in the socioeconomic mobility ladder, how that plays out in Southeast Los Angeles and within these movements, something I'm possibly looking into, but there's so much I haven't been able to highlight even in this small topic. And so I do want to do that, but I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. Medina?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons I've taken away from my research, sort of in a meta way, is just how much I accomplished from the beginning of this process. Again, like as a transfer student, I came in with 2 years on the horizon, not 4. And one of those years was all online. So I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to be like, you got to do research, get it done, or otherwise you're behind. And I'm getting it done, but I think relaxing a little bit for a second and realizing that, hey, you have time, and that, slowly pushing things forward just week by week was one of the biggest lessons I learned during my research. And thankfully my faculty mentor was able to like set those realistic deadlines. And I mean, it was just this time a year ago that I was submitting my project proposal, and to see it all come into fruition now is just the most incredible feeling. So I would say, yeah, learning to relax just a second was the biggest thing I learned. And also learning to not underestimate what a good plan and time and consistency can do, because yeah, I wouldn't have never imagined that I would be here talking to you guys about a whole survey I did and all this analysis. But yeah, it's very rewarding. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Yeah, I have to say, I know some of you from research programs, so it's really been exciting for me to see your work develop over the course of a year, or in the case of some of you, just 2 quarters. It's amazing how much you've accomplished. Hannah, do you want to share a little bit with us about what you've learned?
Yeah. Okay, this is gonna be kind of funny, but the biggest lesson I've learned, honestly, to be completely real, is that I don't want to be in academia. I do not want to be continuing in the academic system per se, at least for a really long while right now. And I think that was a very important and valid lesson for me to learn. And without doing this program, I definitely would not have found that out. And I feel like as a first gen student, I always just thought that grad school was like, oh, this is like the next step I need to do in order to get a job. But then I realized that, you know, being more exposed, doing this research project, connecting with other people, I realized no, there's different avenues for me. Like I am not just limited to academia, and I'm very passionate about research and learning, but it doesn't have to be contained into academia. And so that's kind of like where I'm headed now, where I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to look for more spaces and communities where I can learn from the ground, from the people themselves, and then be able to reshare that back to the folks. Yeah, so that's probably one of the biggest lessons. And then another big lesson is, again, just like reliance on community. I really realized how much I need community. It's not just like something that's would be nice to have or like something that's fun, but it's like, no, it's like it's a very personal need for me to be mentally and physically healthy. I need to be able to rely on people. So yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. Jason, do you want to share with us?
Yeah, so just based on reading literature, I just seen how much the scientific community has progressed with respect to the topic I've studied, from like knowing nothing about this to knowing quite a bit. So a fun fact about why scientists started to study my protein was because people were actually ingesting raw egg white in the past, and that caused a bunch of problems in humans. And then they were studying like why this was the case, and they found that raw egg white contained this thing called avidin, which binds to biotin, basically through an irreversible process. And from that, it basically inhibits all proteins that use biotin as a cofactor, which is my protein. So that's something I learned, which I thought was very interesting. So don't ingest raw egg white, everybody.
So yeah, I was just going to say, so next time I make cookies, I shouldn't eat the batter, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And another thing I would like to talk about is that I realized how much working little by little every day has impacted me in making a tremendous amount of progress with my research. That if you go at your work, even just a little bit every day, in the end, you can make a lot of progress in your research.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's advice that I share with my students all the time. Just try to do a little bit most days. That's fantastic. Okay, great. So it's 1:46 now. So we've got about 10 minutes I've got some more questions I can ask if no one in the audience has questions, but I thought I would give you all a chance to ask questions. So you can, if you want to ask a question, you can go ahead and raise your hand with the little emoji, or you can go ahead and type your question in the chat. And give folks a second to get their thoughts organized. Okay, Maddie, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah, I actually had a question for Janet about her project. I was just wondering if you could explain the mapping, and how did you like directly relate that to housing movements? Because I know that was about pollution.
Yeah, so the way I also can share my screen for a slide I have for this actually. Here it is. Yeah, so this is on like my presentation, but so for example, with GSI, you're able to kind of like pinpoint different places in areas based off of like topography and all these type of things. But the more important part is this is kind of like a screenshot of what my like results showed. And so all of the red is actually Southeast LA. And so it's between 91% and 100%. And once you start getting more towards like the west side of Los Angeles, you start to see a lot more green, solely because there's only one intersection between the 405 freeway. And in Southeast LA, all freeways kind of intersect in different parts. And so that ends up causing a lot of different like harms. But the way I related that to housing is actually the historical component. So Southeast LA used to be a predominantly white, and I believe it's blue collar, like population demographic. And so what ends up happening during the like 60s and 70s, during like redlining practices, a lot of the time once integration started happening, a lot of these white blue collared family members decided they didn't want to live in Southeast LA anymore. And so that this like the concept known as white flight, where like a predominantly white community ends up moving because they start seeing more diversity come into play in fruition. And so you end up seeing this happen. And as you see white flight occur, you also start to see a lot of different polluters come into these communities and being able to pollute. And so there's that direct correlation in history, but also seeing that people who are struggling against environmental health impacts, negative ones, are also struggling to pay their rent. So it's the same community who is having to pay, who is 3 months behind, but also having to pay through hospital visits, through emergency room visits, because they can't afford to have a primary care doctor. And so, yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other questions? I've got kind of a general question. So I know from Hannah that Hannah has decided maybe no more academia, or at least not now. I always tell my students that like grad school will be there when you're ready for it. If that's 1 year or 5 years or 10 years or never, it will still be there. So there's no rush to apply to grad school. But I'm wondering if any of the other three of you are thinking about going on to have careers in research or considering applying to graduate school in any area. It's okay.
Oh yeah, it's in my mind. I'm definitely like post-grad gonna try to find a job and make money so that I can afford to go graduate school in the future. But I will say doing this project helped me learn that research is not as intimidating as I thought it was, and there are definitely peaks and valleys to the research process, and some parts are a little rougher to get through than other parts. But I think as a whole, I was like, I don't think I hate this. So I'm going to stick with that for now and see where that takes me in the future.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else want to share future plans in academia or not?
So I was like in a toss-up, and honestly still am, about whether I wanted to do law school or a PhD route. And a lot of that has to do with like the cost of going to graduate school, as well as like, what do I want to do? I don't think I received an answer to that. I actually received more questions to that because of this project, because I did find like this kind of peace as well as like energized part of me during this research process. But I know how rigorous it is to enter graduate school, as well as like I'm also a first generation student, so I don't really know who to look out into in terms of like the cost, like what is it like to be a graduate student. And so I think those are still on the table, maybe going to law school first and getting a PhD in the far future. But yeah, to be determined.
Okay, great. Well, I will just say to Janet and then to anyone in the audience and to all four panelists, of course, that I'm always available to talk to folks, to talk to you all about, what you want out of your research careers, whether that will involve grad school or not. That's like literally my job. So don't hesitate to send me an email and follow up. And again, that goes for our panelists and any students in the audience too, who are thinking about careers in research. Okay, great. Let me look in the chat. I wonder if we have any other questions in there. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and put my email in the chat, and I would encourage all the panelists to do the same in case any of you want to follow up with us, find out more about any of these research projects. And I was thinking, Hannah, maybe do you want to share your website again in the chat for folks who came in a little bit late? That would be great. Okay, so I will go ahead and wrap up, and I'll just say thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. It was really fantastic to get to hear you all share your work and your ideas and what you've learned. And I'll just say that if you like this panel, you should check out our schedule events for other events during Research Week. I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat the link to our Research Week showcase. So for those of you who don't know, the main event of Research Week is our Research and Creativity showcase. And tomorrow, we have hundreds and hundreds of pre-recorded presentations currently available on our showcase website. And then tomorrow we'll also have hundreds and hundreds of live student presentations. So you can go ahead and check out our website. You can search individually by student or browse by subject area. And I hope you all enjoy the week of events. So thank you again to our panelists. If you could all just hang out for a minute, that would be fantastic. And everybody else, enjoy the rest of Research Week. Bye-bye.